How's it going, guys? Welcome to the channel. This is the Thought Decoder coming to you tonight with the Learning Logic by William Lane Craig. This was actually a children's book about logic that he wrote. He calls it a children's book. I think it's because he wrote some books for his kids, and there are pictures in the books. but it's still pretty complicated for kids. Learning Logic. Maybe I should put that a little closer, huh? Learning Logic by Dr. William Lane Craig. So we're going to take a look at some of the rules that's from this book. Going to try to share my screen. Let's do this. Yeah, you guys bear with me for just 1 second. Turn it off. Didn't work. Okay, here we go. Maybe this will work. Okay, here we are. So we're going to take a look at these rules of inference that we cover in this book. So let's say learning. Oh Lord, Learning Logic by William Lane Craig. I'm going to zoom in on this so you guys can see this. So what is logic? What is it? Right. That's a natural question someone may have. I mean, we use the word logic, but what is logic? Let's see what Dr. Craig says about that. Okay, he talks about why study logic and what is logic. Okay, that's the first, why study logic is the first question. And he answers, what is logic? So logic is the study of the rules of reasoning. So logic is the study of the rules of reasoning. Okay. Did you know there were rules that came to reasoning? And what do rules do? Rules help to guide our thinking. Okay. So logic is the study of the rules of reasoning. Okay. It's funny because the first thing he says is, did you know that all of our reasoning is governed basically by just 9 simple rules of logic? These 9 rules of logic have been used for centuries and constitute a science which we should all be studying at school. If you learn these rules, they can help you present they can help you present good reasons for what you believe. Actually, you already use these rules of logic, whether you know it or not. But these rules apply to all reasoning everywhere, no matter what the subject. We use these rules unconsciously all the time in everyday life. Okay, so the key points, let's say key points here. We'll say, A, we all use these rules. That was one point he made. And we use these rules of logic unconsciously. Okay. We can add C. These rules apply to every subject. Can y'all see that? Oh, y'all can see me. I couldn't see myself, so I didn't know. I didn't know that you all could see me. So yeah, these rules apply. These rules apply to every subject. Okay, so let's think about this. when I was growing up, I would listen to ministers preach. And what I noticed about ministers is that anytime they have a sermon, they have a topic, they're going to give an argument to prove their point. They're going to use scripture as evidence to support their point, but they are reasoning, right? Uh, when they try to convince an unbeliever to give their hearts to the Lord, they give them reasons, right? They they may use hell, like you don't want to burn in hell. They may use the love of God and say God loves you so much that He doesn't want you to die and go to hell, right? So you ought to give your Lord yourself to the Lord, your life to the Lord. They may even use Christ's death for their sins, right? But that's an argument. These are reasons why a person should accept Jesus Christ, right? So we use reasoning in every subject. So I would always wonder why some things some ministers said didn't seem to make as much sense as what other ministers said. And a lot of times I would hear things that didn't seem quite right to me. Like for instance, someone may say, "Well, if you don't go to church, then you're not saved." And I would think about that, and I will wonder about that. Does that really mean that if I don't go to church, I'm not saved? Uh, is that true? Right? So these kind of things always just made you wonder. One second. Yeah, so I'm back. So some preachers would say some thrown off crazy crazy stuff. You know, that was pretty dogmatic. It was pretty unreasonable. Like they would say things like, "Well, if you don't come to church, you're not saved, right?" So what kind of reasoning is that, right? Because you could think, can a person? I would think, can a person not come to church and still be saved, right? Because this person was talking about a specific church. So I was thinking, well, if they don't go to that church, but they go to some a different church, does that mean that they're not saved? Right? So if you think about that, then you say, well, that's not what he meant. But if people don't mean what they say, then why say what they don't mean? Right? Why even say it to begin with if that's not what they meant? So it just shows that some people didn't reason enough or well or even care to just want to say what was true and state it carefully, right? Stated clearly. Uh, so we use it everywhere. When I went to college, when I took philosophy courses, they were reasoning. Thinkers reason. Aquinas reason. John Calvin reason. All these great thinkers. Martin Luther King reason. You read their works; they have arguments to support their positions and their views. So logic is we all use these rules. We use these rules unconsciously, and these rules apply to every subject. That means that if you study logic, you are studying something that applies to everything, right? So that's why I feel like logic is so powerful, and I agree with Dr. Craig when he says that logic should be studied. It should be studied in school. It should be studied in school. So let's continue. I don't know what y'all can see. Okay. So this next page, it says, do you realize that you just presented a logical argument to your friend? Okay, so he gives an example. Suppose your friend says to you, I'm going to study at the library today. And you say, you can't do that. Why not? He asks. Because today is Sunday, you explain, and the library isn't open on Sunday. Do you realize that you've just presented a logical argument? Here's the argument that you presented. Premise one. If today is Sunday, the library is closed. Okay, what? The library is closed. Oh, no, today is Sunday. Today is Sunday. Therefore, the library is closed. Can you see that? Now, this premise 1 and 2 together, if both premise 1 and premise 2 are true, they imply, this is what logic studies, implication, like logical consequence. They imply number 3, which is the conclusion. 1 and 2 cannot be true and 3 not be true. That's what makes this a deductive argument. It's deductively valid, meaning that if 1 and 2 are true, 3 has to be true. Or another way, it's impossible for 1 and 2 to be true and 3 not be true. Okay, so that's an example of an argument. So he continues, logic is the key to critical thinking. Here we go. Key point. He says that logic is the key to critical thinking. Okay, let me read this part. Critical thinking does not mean being skeptical or critical of others. That's just having a bad attitude. Rather, it means weighing the reasons people give for the conclusions they want us to believe. By becoming aware of the rules of logic, we can become better reasoners. People who don't understand the rules of logic are often reduced to fighting and name calling with one another, even trying to settle their disagreements by force. Okay, so look at this. Do you know anybody who, when you try to reason with them, they get angry? They don't know how to disagree without fighting, name calling, or force. Here's one place you can look for this. You can look at politics. Politics is filled with name calling, fighting, and force. Right? People kill over politics. People call each other names over politics. Every time I turn my phone, I see negative articles against President Trump. Right? What's the most recent article? Well, Trump said that veterans were losers and failures or something like that. And so I clicked on the article, and it came from 2018. Supposedly he said this in 2018, but they're airing it everywhere, right? So I began to think, if these people think that Trump is just scum, right, just trash, if they think he's trash, did they think he was trash before they released this article? Right? All the articles they put out about Trump, what does this add to it? Nothing, right? They still have the same opinion about Trump before they put out this article as after, right? So it's just, I don't know. I don't even understand what it is. I think it's just trying to make people not vote for him and hate on him. But what's interesting is that that kind of stuff appeals to certain people, right? Because if I vote for Trump because of what he says, right, then I probably wouldn't have voted for Trump. If I voted for Trump because of his personality and his hair, or his color of his skin, orange man mad, that kind of thing, then I probably would not vote for Trump, right? But if I was looking at his policies, if I was a conservative, for example, which I am, and I said, well, He's the first president to come out against abortion, to march with the right for life. As an African American, he's created opportunity zones, gave permanent funding to HBCUs, reformed the industrial prison complex. He undid some of the 1994 crime bill that Joe Biden wrote. Like on and on and on. The First Step Act for inmates, on and on and on. Like he's done all these things. So although his rhetoric may be offensive, it is offensive sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes it's offensive. And sometimes I'm just gonna say it's racist, right? But I would still vote for him because my vote for him is not necessarily for him as a person. It's for the policies, right? If he's improving the economy and people are making more money and I know I've made more money since he's been president. I've looked at my time under Obama and my time under Trump. I didn't see any difference. I remember the 4 years after Obama had finished his term the first time, because I voted for Obama the first time, but the second time I didn't, because I was like, I hadn't seen any change in America. As a matter of fact, I saw some changes, but those changes went against like traditional values and everything like that. So it seems like he was just trying to uproot traditional values, Christian values. He said America was not a Christian country. Like he was for abortion and late term abortions. He said if his daughter makes a mistake, he's not going to punish her. So her giving birth to a human being is punishment. If she sleeps around. So okay, but Obama was a nice guy. So it was the very opposite of Trump. Like I liked Obama. I still like him as a person. He's a cool guy, but his policies are trash. And Trump doesn't seem like that nice of a person. He can be racist. Like I mean, his has a potty mouth. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speak. Some things he said on tape and about women and the life he's lived doesn't seem like a very appealing lifestyle. Like me and him are completely different, and I don't agree with the way he characterizes things. I think there are kernels of truth in what he says, but he just it seems like he puts him in the worst way possible, and seems to lack cultural sensitivity. So, but I don't have to get upset and want to fight when people, if I say Trump or I'm voting for Trump. If that angers you, then if that angers you, then you're just not thinking critically, right? It's an emotional reaction. So, I try to think reasonably. And if I'm becoming emotional, then that's a sign that I'm not reasoning adequately. If I'm letting my anger control me and just begin to yell and scream, and that's a sign that I want power, I want control over a situation. But reasoning and critical thinking is all about truth, right? So it doesn't mean you're offending other people or you're being skeptical of them. It just means you have reasons and you think about the reasons people give for what they claim and what they believe. Let's continue. I went a long time on that. When we give reasons for what we believe, we're presenting an argument for our view. So what is an argument? Here's the simple, if you can't grasp what an argument is according to logic, here's a simple definition. It's giving reasons for your view. And these reasons are statements, sentences that are either true or false. They are indicative statements, declarative statements. All squares, all triangles have three angles. That's why we call them triangles, right? You may want to say all triangles have three sides, but a square has three sides, right? Because if it has four, it has to have at least three. So that is not definitive of what a triangle is. But if you think about it, triangle, tri means three, like Trinity. Three persons, one God. So all triangles have three angles. This shape, man, sometimes it's hard for me to give examples because I refute myself in my head before I even give an example. Okay, here we go. This shape, let's say X is a shape. Here's my argument. All triangles have three angles. X has only three angles. All right, we might want to toss in only so somebody can't come along and say, oh, well, this shape has a square has three angles as well, you know. So all triangles have only three angles. X has only three angles. Therefore, X is a shape, right? And therefore, X is a triangle, right? That's the conclusion. And from it being a triangle, then you can infer that it's a shape, because anything that's a triangle is a shape, right? So this may seem like an argument that's not really connected to anything, but when you see how it applies to different, like philosophy, like the arguments for the existence of God, arguments for the proof of the resurrection, abduction, etc., conceptual arguments, what exists and what is the nature of things that exist, the definition of things, the concept of things. This is an area where we use deductive logic, and they also use deductive logic in math, right, to deduce things. 1 + 1 = 2, etc. Okay, so let's see what he says here. An argument does not mean a quarrel or a fight. Rather, as we saw in the example above, an argument is a set of premises leading to a conclusion. Okay, now when he says an argument is when you give reasons to support some belief or some claim, those reasons, if you put them on paper, like look right here, 1 and 2 are reasons. These reasons in logic are called premises, right? Because you are building your conclusion on these premises. These are the bases of 3. Okay, so these are called premises. So premise 1, premise 2, and premise 3 is the conclusion. Or you just say conclusion. Okay, so he says an argument is a set of premises leading to a conclusion. When we draw a conclusion on the basis of a set of premises, we're engaged in reasoning, right? So if I have 2 reasons, like 1 and 2, and I draw a conclusion from those 2 reasons, I'm reasoning, right? And that's, so logic says what rules, the question of logic is what rules allow us to go from 1 and 2 to premise 3, right? So you can give any argument, any valid argument, any argument that meets this condition. If 1 and 2 are true, then the conclusion must be true, or it's impossible for the conclusion to be false. Whatever argument meets the condition that if the premises are true, then the conclusion has to be true, that's what you call a valid argument. And logic studies the rules for valid arguments. Aristotle was one of the first people to do this, and he did this with what is called syllogisms. And they call his logic categorical logic. He said all A is B, and all B is C, therefore all A is C. Right? That's a syllogistic argument. I can say all dogs are mammals, right? All mammals are animals, therefore all dogs are animals. Right? That was a categorical, that was a syllogism. Okay, so logic is the key to critical thinking. That was a key point. I said a bunch of other key points too that I'm not going to mention. So I just explained validity too. So if your premises and your argument and your reasoning can be true, and the belief that you're trying to support or the claim you're trying to support can be false, then you have given an invalid argument. For example, if I say today is Friday, what time is it? Today is Friday. It is 8:48. Those are two premises in my argument. Therefore, Bill Gates is the president of the United States. That's an invalid argument. As you can see, both premises that I said were actually true, but the conclusion is false. So anytime a person gives reasons that do not support their conclusion, that can be true and their conclusion still be false, they are giving what's called an invalid argument. So it's basically, now let's say a person gives an argument that is valid, right? You can agree that, well, let's say this. If today is Friday, then tomorrow is Saturday, right? Today is Friday. Therefore, tomorrow is Saturday. Now, that's a valid argument, right? You just see that that's true. It's impossible for tomorrow to not be Saturday if today is Friday, because Saturday is the day after Friday, right? So, but what if today was Thursday? That wouldn't change the validity of the argument, because the validity just says if the two reasons that you give, and you can give more than two reasons, but if your reasons or your premises are true, then your conclusion has to be true. That's a valid argument. So what I just said can be a valid argument, but not be a sound argument. Now, what is soundness? Soundness is when 1 and 2 are true and the conclusion is true. That's a sound argument. It's a valid argument, meaning that if 1 and 2 are true, 3 has to be true. That's a valid argument. Let me write that down. I said write that down. Okay, so this is a valid argument. If the premises are true, then the conclusion has to be true. That's a valid argument. Now, and whenever we give an argument, we don't just want a valid argument. What we want is a sound argument. Sound means this: a valid argument with true premises. What's the difference? Well, an argument can be valid with false premises, right? I can say, if today is Sunday, the library is closed. Today is Sunday, therefore the library is closed. Look at that argument. Is today Sunday? No, it's not. Today is Friday. So that's a valid argument, but it's unsound. It's not sound because 2 is false. So what this shows is that gets me excited, but it just gets me excited. I don't understand why I love this stuff like this. But what this shows is that there are 2 challenges to every argument that a person makes. I don't care who it is, whether it's the theologian, the philosopher, the businessman, the parent, the daughter, the mailman. Whenever we reason, there are 2 challenges to that reasoning. There's 2 ways you can refute them. Either you can show that the reasoning is invalid. That means even if what they're saying is true, it still doesn't lead to their conclusion. Invalid arguments mean that there's no connection. There's no connection. There's no causal connection between their reasons and the conclusion, right? So you can challenge an argument on the basis of its validity, or you can challenge an argument on the basis of its soundness. You can say, well, that's a valid argument, but This is false, right? 2 is false. Or you can say, I mean, it's several ways to challenge, but the most basic challenges are to the truth of the premises or the validity of the argument. And I'm going to stop at 1 hour, but I have no clue how long I've been going. So 30 minutes. Okay. Well, that passed by pretty quickly. All right. So I'm going to keep moving. So chapter 1, this is the first rule of inference. Rule number 1, modus ponens. Modus ponens. So modus ponens is like this. Let's say I have 2, and I have to say this first. In logic, they use letters to replace sentences and declarative sentences, right? Where you make a statement that is true or false. Right. And they do that so that you can look at the logic of a person's argument. So let's look at this argument right here. See where it says if today is Sunday, I'm going to highlight this blue. And you see where it says the library is closed. Let's make that yellow. What just happened? Oh, I changed the text color and I didn't highlight it. Okay. Now, anytime we see a statement with the words if and then, that is called a conditional statement. Conditional. Right? So this is the inference right here. It's the inference. Then this is the factual claim. 2 is the factual claim. So I can take this and this blue and represent it with a letter. Let's say we're on premise number 1. Let's represent that with a letter. The typical letter that you would see is the letter P. The logicians and philosophers, they just tend to always use the letter P. Okay. So now this arrow represents this word then. And in front of this P, anytime you see this arrow, there's an invisible word called if. So if P, then we're going to change this word, I mean, the yellow sentence, to the letter Q. If P, then Q. So if today is Sunday, then the library is closed. Right? So if today is Sunday, then the library is closed. Now we have just symbolized those 2 sentences into what we call variables. P and Q, just like in math. Okay, so if P, then Q. Now look at this. Does this sentence here does this look familiar? If you notice, it's exactly like what letter? P. So we can write on premise 2, P. And we can say, therefore, we can infer what? Q. Okay. This rule is called modus ponens. The mode is Latin for the mode of affirming. Okay. You affirm. It's a mode of affirming. So now why does this work? It works because the conditional says that if this is true, then this is true. Then something else is true, right? That one thing, the truth of one thing implies like there's a logical connection. That's what the conditional is stating between one statement's truth and another statement's truth, right? So if X is a triangle, then X is a shape, right? There's a logical connection because the triangle is a shape, right? It's a category of shapes, and the triangles are in that category of all things that are shapes, right? So think about a set, think about a class or a category, right? That's why they call it categorical logic. So this says that Now, don't get confused with the truth of that, right? Somebody may say, well, it may not be true, but that's not what you do in logic. You're not concerned with truth. You're trying to see that you're assuming that it's true. So assume that if P, then Q. Assume that that's true. And then you also know that P is true. Therefore, by logic, just by the sheer case of the fact of the matter, you know that Q is true, just logically. So you have to assume that if P is true, then Q is true. That's premise one. Premise two is P is true. And you can conclude by this mode of logic, this rule of inference, modus ponens, you can conclude Q. And this is why this argument right here works. If today is Sunday, then the library is closed. Today is Sunday, therefore the library is closed, right? So this is a valid argument. You must distinguish and separate validity from soundness. Valid arguments can have false premises, but sound arguments cannot have false premises. And they also must be valid. So this is a little tricky part to kind of just wrap your mind around. Separating how do you think about arguments, right? We want to assess an argument philosophically, right? Instantly. It's just something in us that's philosophical. We want to say, well, if P then Q, well, how do I know if P then Q? How do I know premise one is true? What if that's false, right? So separate. When we're talking about validity, when we're talking about logic, we're not talking about truth. We're assuming truth, right? Because you're trying to see that if what the person is claiming is true, that it leads to their conclusion, right? That's logic. Let me say that again. In logic, you're trying to see that if what a person is claiming is true, then it leads to their conclusion, right? So if P, then Q, P, therefore Q. All right, so that's one rule of inference. Let's say rule number two. I already gave an example of that, so y'all see that. Maybe I should still give an example. But I don't see. Oh, here it is. I must have passed the examples. Okay, so let me give you an example before we move on. So here's premise one. If Bill studies hard, then he will get a good grade in logic. Bill studies hard. Therefore, I'm not going to say it, but just think about it. Look at these two premises. Modus ponens says that if P, then Q. Look, if this is true, then this is true. P is true, therefore Q. Now, what will we infer about this example? From this example, what can we infer from these two premises? If Bill studies hard, then he will get a good grade in logic. Bill studies hard. So what's the conclusion? Right here. Let's copy that. Therefore, he will get a good grade in logic. He is a pronoun, personal pronoun, and the antecedent is Bill. It refers back to Bill. Okay, so that's an example. Let's go to rule two. And these are some of the modus tollens. It's Latin for, maybe I should just put what this stands for. Mode of denial. Mode of affirming. Affirmation. Affirming, right? And if that's mode of affirming, that's just mode of denying. Those are both gerunds. They end in ing. Okay, so let's take a look at this. I'm actually going to look at, well, that's just for the example, we're going to look at something interesting. This time, let's start off with how it looks like the variables. Then we'll show you how to fill in variables. So premise one goes like this. What did I say is in front of the P? It's an imaginary if. So if P, then Q. That's how you read this. If P, then Q. Okay. Now here's the difference. Not P. Wish it was one of those. Okay, I think this is one of them. There we go. Not P. Okay. Oh, no, that's wrong. I'm so sorry. Not Q. Okay, so what can we infer from this? If P is true, then Q is true. This symbol right here means not. It means you deny whatever it is. So if Q was today is Sunday, right? You can change that to, if you deny that it's called a negation. If you negate that premise, then it turns into today is not Sunday, or it's not the case that today is Sunday. Okay. So if P then Q, not Q, now what can you infer from that? Right? Think about it. You're saying that if there's some statement P that is true, then Q is also true. That's one premise. Then the second premise, you're saying, but Q is not true. What can you infer from that? If P is true, then Q is true, but Q is not true. Therefore, and you can infer this, not P. Two basic rules of inference. Okay, that's modus tollens. All right, it's the mode of denying. Okay, let's look at an example. Here is Bill Craig's he calls this the axiological argument. For the existence of God, also known as the moral argument. Let's just put the moral argument, you get it. Argument from natural theology. Let me put it. Okay, so here's premise one. If God doesn't exist, then objective moral values and duties don't exist. Okay, here's premise two. It's not the case. That's like the negation. So I can say it's not the case in front of everything, and it's just like me using what? No, wrong button. Just like me using this symbol right here. Okay, it's not the case that objective moral values and duties do not exist. I'm gonna put do not exist. Don't. Sounds a little countrified. Okay, So it's not the case that objective moral values and duties do not exist. Therefore, what's the conclusion? What's the conclusion? What can we infer from this? Okay, so let's go back. I'm not going to tell you yet. Let's go back. If P, then Q, not Q, therefore not P. So what is P here? What is P here? We made P blue earlier. That's P. Here's Q. Okay. Look, here's Q again. But we are denying Q. So denial, let me highlight it red or something. So it's saying that this is wrong and this is not true. That's basically what it's saying. This is not true. So if God's non-existence implies the non-existence of objective moral values and duties, meaning what is objective moral values and duties? Let's break objective, let's break values and duties down really quickly. Something is objective if it is human mind independent, right? If human beings' opinions of that thing don't affect its existence, then that thing is objective, right? So what about morality? What about moral values? What is moral value? Moral value is what a thing is worth, right? It is if a thing is good or bad. Moral duty is what is action. It's a quality of action. No, moral duty is what you should do, right? So if it is bad to murder babies for fun, right? Let's say that's immoral. It's bad. Then I have a moral duty. My moral duty is not to do that, right? But if God doesn't exist, then where does my duty come from? Does it come from people? If it comes from people, then it's not objective, right? Because it's dependent on their opinion, their mind, their thinking, their consensus. Some you have a lot of unbelievers, atheists, who say, well, morality is just about consensus. We just come to agree. Well, that means that it's not really right or wrong. It's not objectively right or wrong. It's subjective, right? It's all a matter of preference. It's all a matter of vote, right? And then the problem with that is nobody comes together and forms a consensus of what they believe is right or wrong. That doesn't happen. That's just imaginary. That's imaginary. We live in a society that already has a system, but I mean, the law historically, what is legal is not equivalent to what is right and wrong. So that they can't even make that case, right? Slavery was legal. Was it wrong? If you say it was wrong, then who came to vote, right? Where was the vote? That's one problem with that view. Subjective values can change depending on the consensus of the people, right? So the same thing that you think is wrong and evil, the same thing that you think is wrong and evil. I'm glad I'm not on mute. I was talking one time for like 30 minutes and I was on mute. I was like, no. But the same thing that you think is wrong and evil can change, right? Over time, if people agree to a different value system. So if there is no God, there's no moral ground, moral something that makes it the case that something is wrong or right, whether or not people agree about what is wrong or right, then moral values do just become a matter of consensus and public opinion. Then you get psychopaths who don't agree with the consensus of everyday people. So that's moral values and duties. So what this is saying that if God doesn't exist, then there is no being to make moral values, right, good and bad, exist for human beings apart from their own opinions and their agreement with other people. And then the second part, duties, is if God doesn't exist, then no, there are no moral duties. Like, who gives you a duty? People, you can't give me a duty. A human being can't give me a duty, right? I have no duty to do what someone else wants me to do. They may want me to do what they want. Oh, agree with our consensus, agree to our moral code and our value system, but I have no real duty, right? So that's the arguments, just so you can understand, grasp on the concepts. What Bill Craig does is he shows how, or rather explains, gives a story of how if God doesn't exist, then we're just the products of evolution, right? We just evolved. We're just evolved monkeys, and so who should who should determine which group of monkeys we listen to, right? So if this group of monkeys or apes determine that you shouldn't kill people, and I'm a monkey who says, well, I think I should. Like, who are you to tell me different? Like, we're all the same thing. We're all on a level playing field. Like, we have no authority. That's the thing. No transcendent authority to tell one another how to live, right? So that's why they come up with this myth of consensus, like it's agreement. Something you agree to, but that doesn't exist. It's just a flat out lie. Nobody agrees to morality, right? I've never voted on whether it's right or wrong to kill a person, like morally wrong. I never voted on that. It's just been like a value that's in me. A lot of things I learned in church, and a lot of values I have that a lot of people in my church don't have. So it's something that transcended, because I can clearly see that certain things were right or wrong. Just like I can see that there are objects in my perception. So that's the thing. So back to the logic. I just explained the argument, but now you see how this works in natural theology. So let's look at back to the arguments. So if it's not the case that objective moral values and duties do not exist, that's just like you saying they do exist, right? Some things are really right. I mean, and some things are really wrong. Evil exists. You hear even atheists talk about evil, but what is evil in an atheist view, right? So they say, well, suffering, right? Suffering exists. Well, okay, suffering exists, but is that evil? Right. So there cannot be a problem of evil without evil. So if you want to say evil, suffering is evil, then you just placed evil in the category, suffering in the category of things that are evil, but you have not defined what evil is. What does it mean for something to be evil? Well, it means for it to cause pain, right? Well, so if I took away your pain, was able to surgically remove the pain from your body and just paralyzed you, and then shot you in the head, would that not be evil because you didn't suffer, you didn't experience pain, right? So evil is a moral value. That's the bottom line, and you can't get away from that. Every example is gonna lead to, if you try to define evil through examples, you're gonna always miss out on an essential piece, a part of evil, the idea of evil that we all kind of just sense and that's intuitive to us. So that shows that evil is something that is that exists, but it's not a physical thing, right? So anyway. So that there's no problem even for the atheists. It can't be unless they are, Platonists and they believe that there's a form of evil. But I'm sidetracking. So what we can infer from this argument is this. Therefore, it's not the case. It's not the case that objective moral values and duties don't exist, right? So now look right here. You have a negative here, and you have a negative here. In logic, you call that double negation, right? You call that double negation. So just bear with me. I can show it to you. So double negation. So since I have these two negatives in that claim in three, that premise three is equivalent. Oh no, that's not. This is the conclusion. I'm tripping. Doesn't exist. Okay, so that's the claim. So it's not the case that God doesn't exist. But if it's not the case that God doesn't exist, it follows logically by the rule of double negation that God exists. Oh, QED. That's what mathematicians put at the end of their proofs, right? So, bam, voila, God exists. That's an argument for the existence of God. That's a moral argument for the existence of God. Now, there's two challenges to any argument, and this argument can be challenged. You can challenge the truth of the premises, and you can challenge the logic. Now, it's valid, so you're going to have to challenge the argument on soundness. Is it a sound argument? So there are other requirements for what we typically call a good argument. And this is a side note. A good argument is going to have premises that the person you're trying to convince is more likely than not to accept, right? So if I'm trying to convince Jacob, who is a morally good person, right, but he's an atheist, but he believes that things are really right and really wrong. He doesn't believe that moral value. He does not believe that moral values are subjective, like just a matter of preference. Then when I show him this argument and he sees how the premises are true, and then I show how when these premises come together, what they imply, he has to accept the conclusion because he sees that it's logically valid. So it's like, wow, I can no longer believe something, right? I have to say, well, maybe objective moral values and duties don't exist, right? He can get out the argument by saying that, right? Right. So this just so he can just deny the premise one. He can say, well, God can fail exist in objective morals and values. Objective moral values and duties still exist. This is what Platonists do, right? They say that there is this world of forms, the good and bad, and the form of the triangle, and that everything we observe are instances or participate in this form. So the triangles we see are never perfect triangles because there is this idea of the triangle that is perfect, and the triangles we observe and perceive participate in triangleness, right? So there are these moral values and duties. They are objective, even if God doesn't exist. So that's the Platonist route. So what Bill Craig has recently done is he's denied abstract objects, that abstract objects exist altogether, and he thought it led to some other problems. But let's see what we've done. I've talked my brain to sleep. Okay, so well, right at 60 minutes, exactly where I want it to be. Let's go back to the home screen here. So thanks for tuning in, guys. We hope you learned something. Share this video. This is the Thought Decoder. Here on my channel, we help Christians and believers to think more clearly, to state their beliefs, to defend their beliefs. Today, we talked about the moral argument for the existence of God. We looked at some logic at the same time. So we did both of these things. It's very rigorous. It takes a lot of thinking. I know it's kind of like math, but it's something about it that I love. Thanks for tuning in. And where it's all for tonight, remember to think better.